Birding on the back of the camel. After all, what better way could there be to travel than inside a giant mechanical camel? Rand was in a good mood, which he demonstrated by accompanying every other spoken word with a flourish, and by punctuating every sentence with a twirl of his parasol. He had been in a good mood for 2 solid days, and everyone on board the camel was starting to hate him. 2 days ago, he had unwisely engaged in a tense argument with the witch Jezerel, who had ended the confrontation by cursing him with extreme optimism and high spirits. Just look, flourish, at this, flourish, weather, twirl, bright, flourish, and beautiful, flourish, twirl. The camel lurched forward. Roger E. Rand had already been in possession of a certain disdain amongst the passengers and crew of the camel, which was mostly due to his total two-facedness. Rand was a travelling salesman who sold whatever came to hand, and his profession had taught him to project a pleasant and personable manner wherever possible. He presented himself finely enough, making efforts to keep his old dark business suit in as fine a condition as could be managed while travelling through a desolate expanse inside a giant mechanical camel, and at all times keeping his dark hair and beard finely trimmed and pristinely combed. All of this served to hide his true self, a mildly bigoted tricksy grifter, but sometimes even he let slip. His new self raised a leg and spun on one foot, swinging the parasol around as he went. Delightful! Teague and Brune were sat on the edge of the platform with their legs hanging over the side and their harpoon guns resting in their laps. Teague leant himself subtly towards Brune's ear and with coarse whisper suggested, "We could just push him over the side. Say he slipped. They'll all play along." Brune sincerely considered this suggestion, exhaling a long, tense breath as she did so. She examined the wire spool attached to the side of her harpoon gun. The whole apparatus was a crude design, entirely functional. "Or," she whispered with jovial tone, "we could shoot him through the head with one of these and say it went off by accident." What did he say to Jezerel? Didn't you hear? He told her that people might be nicer to her if she smiled more. Wow, now I really want to throw him off. The camel lurched forward. In the early hours of the morning, a distant flock of cultures had been spotted, perhaps trading gossip on their way to the country club, and the camel's passengers had been offered a chance to engage in a round of so-called birding. By mid-morning there were 6 passengers up on the platform atop the camel's hump, equipped with harpoon guns and wire lines to skewer and ensnare the encroaching cultures and with parasols to protect them against the punishing desert sun. They were being overseen by the young steward Winston, who made use of a small telescope to observe their encroaching quarry. Above them the extendable aerial pole flapped back and fro in the breeze. To lure in the cultures, the would-be hunters had attached a variety of bright and patterned cloth pieces to the aerial pole, after first soaking them in whatever raw meat juices could be scrounged from the refectory. Even if a culture can resist the allure of fine patterned cloth, it surely cannot suppress its most base instinct to seek out raw meat. The camel lurched forward. "Here they come," said the steward, setting down his now redundant telescopic lenses. The approaching flock caught Rand's attention. "Oh, just look at them! Are they not delightful? Such plumage!" Steward Winston gave Rand a look, both concerned and terse. "Mr. Rand," he started calmly, "please may you stop swinging your parasol around. That is not what it is intended for." Wells, the tiny yellow gremlin, raised his harpoon gun towards an upward trajectory. "Good hunting, alas!" he spat in his squeaking, garbled voice. Teague returned to his position at Brune's ear. "What did he say?" Brune turned slightly with her eyes dulled by irritation at his pointless question. "How should I know? I don't speak gremlin either." "I'm speaking English," said the downtrodden Wells, easily overhearing them thanks to his enormous ears and the relatively confined space on the open platform. "I try, but they'll never understand me." "Yes, you beautiful yellow fellow," said Rand through a large off-white toothed smile. "It is a glorious day." Wells shook his head. "I'm sure this is somehow racist." The camel lurched forward, and then, with screeches aplenty, the flock was on them. Cultures are enormous, long-necked and long-beaked, and with a wingspan of up to 2 meters. Even when flying high and alone, they cannot be missed, not only for their ridiculous size, but also for their constant chatter. Cultures, akin to their simpler vulture ancestors, are not hunters, but instead subsist on prey that is already dead when they find it. Because of this, they feel no need to conceal their approach with silence, but rather call endlessly about the most inane things. "Did you see the cricket match? What a lovely carcass this is! Is that a new beret?" Chatter, 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 chatter. The effect becomes greatly exaggerated when they form a flock, as each will attempt to be heard over the others, leading to an increasingly loud cacophony of polite discourse. "How ghastly!" A dozen of these pristine bird beasts descended upon the camel, drawn in by the promise of meaty delights. Old Mrs. Mackalow got the first shot, piercing a big-bodied brute in the gut. "Ah!" it screamed as it fell. You fiend! You have skewered me most foully! Their voices were high-toned and melodic, not the standard screeches of more common birds, and their diction was excellent. Teague fired and missed, and cursed himself for such ineptitude. Then it was Wells, catching a fat female through the wing. How dare you! The creature flapped about manically, ensnaring several of its companions in the wire line. We had tickets to the opera, damn you! Brune angled her shot so as to get 2 in 1, the harpoon drawing out the wire spool as it went. The shot went through a head and then a torso, all the falling birds lamenting as they came down. It's Carmen, damn you! Carmen! Never again shall we hear the sweet sound of the habanera. In the words of the bard, out, out, brief candle! Winston fired his own shot, but the male he snagged was so strong as to pull the harpoon gun out of his hands. The steward made to grab it as it flew off, very nearly stepping straight over the edge of the platform. At the last moment, Teague and Brune grabbed the small man by his legs and pulled him back. Thank you, sir, miss. He watched the culture spinning towards the ground with his gun hanging by the wire. I'm not getting that back, am I? Old Mrs. Mackerlow picked up her prey and wrung its long neck with one hand. Good eating, she said with crooked smile and gravel tones. She had the voice of one of those people who smokes their entire life, but then, in clear defiance of medical science, does not die. By now the flock was starting to fight back, having realized that this was a trap, and not, as they had initially thought, a travelling pop-up meat market. Quickly, chums, called a long-bodied male. These beasts mean to catch us and cook us. Spit upon them. Use your acidic bile. No, thank you, replied the sleek female. I'll not befoul my fine feathers with my acidic bile or anyone else's. Smaller than that Tim was the only passenger yet to fire his weapon, as he had made the woeful mistake of biding his time for a closer shot, and had then been accosted by a particularly enraged culture who was now trying to rip his face off. He dropped the gun and swatted at the thing with his tiny hands. Get off! Get off! He screamed. Rand spun towards the boy. Goodness, young man, you look like you're having fun. Smaller than that Tim snatched Rand's parasol and began beating the culture with it. Wells and old Mrs. Mackerlow picked up their own parasols and joined in. The screamed calls of the cultures were becoming unbearable as they dived and snatched at those on the platform. Having failed to reload any of their harpoon guns, or having lost it completely in Steward Winston's case, the passengers and crewmen had resorted to beating away any cultures that came close enough. This is far more intense than I thought it was going to be, Teague shouted above the din. A claw sliced his forehead before Brune caught the owner in her parasol and smacked it down onto the burning metal of the platform. Smells like chicken, Wells noticed. Old Mrs. Mackerlow, having decided that enough was enough, ripped the aerial pole from its clamp and swung it around in a wide circle. Duck! She cried. A duck? asked an elated Rand. Where? The remaining cultures scattered with cries of regrouping at the tennis club. The handful that had been caught lay twitching and dying upon the platform. Smaller than that Tim was still beating his would-be face-ripper with a now broken parasol. By this point the bird was flattened and mangled. Young sir, called the steward, raising imploring hands. I believe you have got him. The camel lurched forward. 6 caught, growled old Mrs. Mackerlow. Not a bad catch. Should be meats for a couple of dinners. Brune made rueful glances around the platform, taking in each of the fallen birds. She pushed back long hair that had fallen before her eyes in the kerfuffle. You know, I'm not a vegetarian or anything, but she looked up at the assembled company. Is it really right to eat a creature capable of thought and speech? And they speak so beautifully as well, beamed Rand. Old Mrs. Mackerlow mulled the thought, examined it, considered it, drew in a deep breath and responded, Whatever. Steward Winston hailed them then. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could please have your weapons and parasols back, and if you could please take your catches with you as you go. Next he made a stern look at smaller than that Tim. And young Master Tim, I'm afraid you will be charged for the broken parasol. Will you be being charged for the gun you lost? Retorted a smug and nasal-voiced smaller than that Tim. Yes, said the tense-toothed steward. Harpoons were retrieved, wire spools were wound back in, and Winston gathered up armfuls of hunting apparatus and fashionable sun protection. The passengers moved down the ladder at the rear of the platform with kills in hand. Wells attempted to address them casually. If you give me the feathers, I could make a nice coat. Yes, said an uncertain Teague with pointed gesture. I agree. Wells slumped his shoulders and shook his head. Useless. The camel lurched forward. As they moved down, Brune turned to the still ever-smiling Rand. Mr. Rand, you didn't really do anything up here. Why did you come up? Rand looked all around, taking in the endless, empty expanse in every direction. It's just such a lovely day, isn't it? And I've always found that if you must travel, then you should try to enjoy it as much as possible, however you can." Rand looked up towards a bright and empty sky, then down at the great metal body of the camel. "After all, what better way could there be to travel than inside a giant mechanical camel?"